I'm Sonia Lennon.
And I'm Brendan Courtney, and you're listening to Lennon Courtney Left Alone, a podcast about conversations we have when we're left alone.
But hark, we're not left alone anymore.
Oh no, for Series 6, we're switching things up, and each week we're going to be joined by a brilliant woman sharing their stories. It's Lennon Courtney 2.0, Lennon Courtney Left Alone with guests.
Our first guest is Dr. Helen Zidon. Helen is Deputy Head of Medical Information at Aspen Pharma Group and a public speaker and advocate for global and public health.
Helen talked to us about education and how her experience has been living in Ireland. It is an incredible story.
Okay, let's get started. This is Lennon Courtney Left Alone with guests.
So you're very welcome, Helen. I feel like you're an old friend now because we spent quite a lovely long talk with you as part of our college degree. As our master's, you were one of our guest speakers. That's where we met virtually about a month or two ago. And your talk really impressed us, actually, in, I suppose, what I felt was such an accessible way to explain your life in Ireland. And it was really groundbreaking for me, even though you think you know stuff, you don't know nothing. So you're very welcome.
Full disclosure, and I was just saying this to Helen, I was actually not at that talk. So I have a grand sense of FOMO about what I missed that day, because actually looking at the response from our classmates to your talk, Helen, it was off the Richter scale. It was much more impactful than anything that we had heard. And so it was literally the only guest lecture that I had missed. So I am so excited to talk to you today.
Oh, that's so nice. Thank you so much for having me on here. And I'm happy that talk resonated with you and your class up to the point that I'm here, which is nice. But also because, talking about some of these issues, especially that course that you're doing, I have to commend you for signing up for that kind of course and choosing to be intentional about growing in knowledge and understanding people and cultures and being more tolerant. But, just for me, whenever I do any of these talks, I just make sure that it's as simple as possible, using real life, day-to-day examples to highlight very serious issues. I think that's the best way to communicate something like this or like that to people. You have to make things that are complex, simple to understand and in a way that people will remember. That's very effective communication, in my opinion. So, yay, I did something good.
Well, yeah, and I hadn't joined the dots there, but that's what wins hearts and minds. It's human stories, and human stories in an environment that we can all relate to, like the Lewis or college or Ireland or Dublin, So in those with that intention, it really worked. So well done you, and thanks.
Oh, thank you.
So Helen, we have established where we found you. You were brought to us by our lecturer Firkin as part of our guest lecture and lived experience series. I guess it's really important for you to give us a little sense of your background, your context, your story, how you came to be a sought after speaker and podcast guest, and who you are, really.
I'm not going to give you the interview version that I usually give when I'm introducing myself. I'm going to be as real as possible. Okay. So my name is Dr. Helen Zidon. I'm Deputy Head of Medical Information at Aspen Pharma. So it is a global pharmaceutical company with its European headquarters here in Ireland. But before I got to that point, I'm Nigerian. I was born in Nigeria, but I've lived in Ireland longer than I've lived anywhere else in the world. My mom worked for the UN. My dad was in the Nigerian army. So I moved around quite a bit as a child. I lived in France. I lived in Kenya. I was in England for a bit. So Ireland is my home because I've been here since 2008. I came here for college at RCSI, the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland. I studied medicine there. And then after that, while I was doing that, I got exposed to Ireland, Irish people, Irish healthcare system. And I think just those experiences made me realize that I did not want to work in a clinical or hospital setting. The reason I got into medicine in the first place was because I wanted to kind of bridge the gap between healthcare professionals and patients. I find that there's, even till today, there's such a mismatch between what a doctor would be communicating and how a patient is taking that information in. And that's in different aspects, not only in a consultation room or in a hospital ward, but also with, medical adverts, and just understanding the healthcare system itself. So the reason why that was my initial passion is because in Nigeria, I'd seen that from a very young age, because my dad was in the army. I used to volunteer in military hospitals, and I used to see just lots of people just not understanding. Obviously, over there's a higher rate of illiteracy. And so a lot of the patients were just taking in medications, kind of listening to information, but you could clearly see that it was going over their heads. Healthcare workers being too busy to pause and give them the information they need, seeing diseases that could be prevented being passed on from one person to the other, or being adopted through, I don't know, childbirth or inhalation and so on, just because the layman did not understand what was being said to them or did not know how to break down those complex medical concepts. So that's why I got into it in the first place. I'm a communicator, and I felt like I could communicate this better. But while being in hospital, I realized that the real change is not necessarily between patients to doctor in that hospital setting. Real change is usually in policies, in global health and public health. Unfortunately, our healthcare systems are run by politicians. And so I realized that I needed to step out of the walls of a hospital to be able to achieve that dream. And so,
Helen, can I ask you then, in terms of the health system as we know it, and obviously it's such a big bucket item for us at the moment, is your feeling then that it's just the whole system of it is not fit for purpose?
I think it depends on the country you're in. So it's not, it differs globally, but there's a global issue, and then there's like a specific country specific issue. In Ireland, there is a big issue with the workforce and equality of the types of quality of treatment. And with the workforce, I don't think that the country has adapted to its growing population. There aren't enough doctors to take care of the population. There's a lot of migration, immigration taking place, and I don't think the country has really moved forward with the times. With regards to workforce and infrastructure as well, there aren't enough hospitals. And as you can see with the HSC hack, the systems are not up to date. So
do you think the problem, just reading between the lines what you're saying, is a two-tier healthcare system? That's fundamentally the problem.
Yes, but I think there's also, this is a simplistic way of describing a complex problem, but I feel like healthcare professionals are not as involved in the decision making as they should be. I feel like the people who are making decisions don't have a primary understanding of what is essential in the system. And healthcare professionals are too busy doing their work to be able to get involved in the policy making and policy implementation. So, and this is something that is a problem globally. It's very difficult to solve because you do need them to be focused on their work, but you do need people who can step out of that with the primary experience to be able to make policies that are realistic and feasible and for the betterment of people rather than for political will or political outcomes.
Can I ask you a question? So you studied, basically your primary qualification you earned in Ireland.
Yes.
And you stayed in Ireland. What was the attraction to staying? You've got such an international flavour of experience.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if I lived between France and Kenya, I'm not sure Ireland would win, to be perfectly honest.
No, Ireland, no. I think that Irish people don't know the value of what they have. This is a very beautiful country. It is a very peaceful country, and things work. They don't work as efficiently as in other places, but they do work. So you can find yourself getting quite comfortable here because there's a lot of good. There's a lot of bad, but there's a lot of good, and more good than with other places. You don't have natural disasters. There are no civil wars. Politics is a little here and there, but you have relatively good leaders, you know? So I think that there's a lot going on here that maybe, you know, that's why there's a lot of immigration taking place. That's why it's now becoming such a hub for tech. It's becoming a hub for industry. There's a lot of good here.
It's really interesting to hear you talking about Ireland in a way that we don't really think of it, you know, and even to like this whole series is going to be dedicated to hearing new perspectives and new ways of looking at things, thinking about things, and responding to things. So it's already, I'm refreshed by hearing you talk about our country in a way that we don't really talk about it.
I know of people who've come here with their families to settle here, because there is, you know, people always talk about the American dream, but there is the Irish dream. And I see my friends being born out of that, where their parents have moved here for a better life. The system has afforded them the ability to get housing, education, and then from that generation, their children are Irish now, and they are thriving in society and contributing to society quite well. But then there's the ugly part of that as well, which is the assimilation into culture. And you know, with new things, people have to be more tolerant and more understanding of different cultures, different languages. You know, it's becoming a more metropolitan place, but not everyone is welcoming to that fact. That's the way the whole world is going, by the way. So whether we want it or not, this is happening. But
and do you see it as a polarization then, that you're either going one way or the other?
Yes. So, for example, I'm going to give you an example of my education. My college takes in so many international students, and the fees are not cheap. You can Google it for yourself. For a year, it's very expensive. But at the end of the degree, the system, I spoke about this at the lecture. The system.
So this what the story you're just about to tell is in one of my essays, actually.
Oh.
Really amazing. I mean, it's so worth knowing, and it's so systemic. But proceed. Sorry.
Yeah. So you come into the country, you're here for 6 years. You get taught by the best Irish surgeons and doctors. You're in Irish hospitals. Your first exposure to patients are Irish patients. You know, the system trains you, and then at the end of it says goodbye to you abruptly. You have to leave because the way the internship or training program works is that regardless of where you're from, you get an internship position in a hospital based on your nationality. So all Irish students, get positions first, and that's fine. This is their country. I understand that. But if the smartest person in the class is non-EU, or let's say they're from Australia or from the Middle East or Nigeria, they wouldn't get a job until the least intelligent EU candidate has a job.
I think it's just laughable, isn't it?
So it's funny. Irish first, then EU, and then non-EU. And so because there aren't many spots for that training program, they still haven't increased the number, even though the population is growing. Because there's a limited number of spots, you find really intelligent Irish trained talents not getting jobs in the healthcare system and having to go back to their countries.
Just to name check where the story came from, one of our colleagues, Alan, who had worked in the HSE in the healthcare system, said, I have to ask, he said, Helen, why don't any of the students from the African continent end up in A&E? And I was like, because they're the most sought after internships and the Irish kids get them. Yes. We're like, what?
Yeah.
He thought, because he worked at the HSE, he thought that it was a choice to go, not to go into the front line or to the exciting jobs, No,
it is not a choice. And also, but the thing is, the system is so weird because the first year is the internship year. There's only a few spots. But then after that 1 year, there's this huge number of positions open for SHOs. They got senior house officers and registrars. But once that year is done, a lot of the Irish students would leave to go to America or Australia. right? And so the system is then now deficient of some spots, and then they'd have to get in other healthcare professionals who've trained in other countries to come in, do an exam, and then work. It's a bit crazy. But the thing about the work that they do is that you can be in that position for up to 10 years because they don't get assimilated into a specific training or residency program. Those are also more specific for Irish individuals. So if you want to become a consultant in, say, 6 years, that training program is mostly for Irish people. So you can come in from your country. Lots of people do because obviously they'll get more money here and so on. And all those, all those good things I talked about the Irish system. So they would come here for those things. But in terms of progressing in their careers, it's capped at a certain level due to their nationalities. And then to become a consultant too, the positions are limited as well. So it's like limited positions, lots of jobs, limited positions. And so for the consultants in Ireland, to become a consultant in Ireland, a consultant has to either retire or die. And obviously it's a I don't know, it's a bit crazy.
And I think that it is crazy, but I'm the boring person who has to say, let's take a second to take all that in and we'll come back in a moment.
So there are evident systemic issues there. And I mean, I would say even legally questionable systemic issues. Like I don't see how, that can be acceptable practice. But what about sort of interpersonal equality on the ground? What does that look like, either within your own peers or within the public? What is that like for you?
Okay, so for me, I must say that my experience is not that of every Black person that lives in Ireland. I'm someone who came here for education and then stayed. There are people who came here maybe through the asylum system or just migrated here with their families. And so their experience is very different. Some people have it more pleasant than others. But I'm going to speak on my perspective and then just give you some examples of other people's perspectives as well. So I came here and I went to a very international school. I was in a bubble. There's, even when you're doing coursework, there's a way that they put groups together. So there's always someone from a different demographic in the group. So I had no issues with interpersonal relationships. It was just about tolerability and adapting in RCSI. But then I started getting into, on the streets, I did have moments of people throwing things at me, calling me a monkey and so on, right? And those are things that for me, someone who grew up in Africa, who I just was not affected by it because I was just very self-aware of who I am. But I can't imagine what that would be like for someone who went to nursery school here and primary and secondary school and then having been called those names. I've heard very terrible experiences and how that's affected the mental health of many people. I didn't have that experience. But when I started working, I think that was like a bubble burster for me. Bubble burster in the sense that, just experiencing really blatant things like, doing a round to people and maybe to guests in the office and then choosing to avoid me because he was worried about my accent or, for example, everybody choosing to not learn how to pronounce their name. If we can learn how to say Tchaikovsky or Quiva or, why can't you learn an African name?
And Quiva's hard. Like it is really hard.
Exactly.
And I know and love some Quivas, but it is tough.
Exactly. Or, comments about hair or food and, just little things here and there, or someone blatantly telling me that, because I didn't know something about European history and they're like, how do you not know that? And I said, but do you know anything about African history? And they said, no, I don't have to. It's not as important as European history.
Wild.
I say, colonialism is not as important as European history.
And are they not perhaps interlinked?
Are they not interlinked? And then that brings you then start to think, okay, so why are they like this? And that's because educational systems don't expose people to this. They're not exposed. You're not being taught global history the way you should be. You know, you don't know the geography and the history because a lot of it is even masked.
Helen, can I ask you, and this is, when you talk about simplicity, this is nursery book simplicity, right?
Yeah.
If you were to put a percentage of good experiences with Irish people versus bad experiences, because it's difficult to get a sense of the pervasiveness of this and where it sits in sort of a national framework of racism. You know, how racist are we? Are we 20% racist? 40% racist?
There is actually a European Commission on Human Rights that I can't remember the figures right now, that discusses, you know, workplace aggression and discrimination to people of color in Europe, and Ireland is high.
Yeah, I read that report. Yeah.
Ireland is high up there. But another thing is, for me, I would say mine is mostly, 70 good, 30 bad. It could even be maybe 75, right? And that's because Irish people are not confrontational. No. So I have to say, in comparison,
you haven't been around my house at Christmas.
In comparison to the UK, Irish people are so much friendlier.
Yeah,
you're definitely friendly people, you know. But then I think a lot of it is covert. There's a lot of microaggression, and there's a lot of unconscious bias. There are a lot of things that are not very upfront because that's not the way people are here. But it would be in subtle comments. It would be in who gets the promotion versus who doesn't, who gets hired versus who doesn't. Am I pulling my bag away when I see a Black man walk into a shop, or 4 Black boys walking to a mall and then the police is being called on them just because they're together, you know? Or every time there is a gathering of Black people, a concert, a party, so on, there's always heavy police presence there. So it's, like I said, there's lots of good, but then the bad is subtle but very perverse. So
here's the big question. Okay, Lennon Courtney are going to give you a magic wand. Let's take ourselves off to an enchanted Ireland, the Emerald Isle, and you have 3 wishes and you can change society for the better. What would your 3 wishes be? Okay, I like to simplify complex things. So let me see. I wish the world was simpler when it comes to, or Ireland would be simpler when it comes to leveling the playing field for equalities for people. 2, I wish there was less bureaucracy, more forward thinking when it comes to developing and implementing policies for healthcare, for poverty eradication, and for justice. And then I wish people were kinder, more empathetic, more understanding and tolerant towards one another. It's a very simple concept that a lot of people tend to ignore. If someone is here in the country and they don't look like you, that does not mean that they are not Irish. That does not mean that they are not contributing to society. It doesn't mean that they're leeching of society. They're doing a lot of the jobs that a lot of people don't want to do, to feed their families, to be safe, to leave a legacy on the earth. So I just wish people would be kinder. I have to ask, how much do you think racism is grounded in fear and ignorance? I think that's the whole, I think most people are good, but when people are scared, they just automatically go into that fight or flight kind of situation and resort to language, body language, communication, and actions that may not be their natural self, but just because they don't know or they're worried and they don't know how to react to it. So rather than pausing and asking polite questions or just giving people a chance, they would make quick judgments based off what they see in the media, which is not great for depicting Africa, by the way, or any other third world country, or not only media, but then just hearsay. It's discourse, isn't it? It's what's happening in the ether. It's what people are talking about, you know? And it's almost like
the opposite of that fear and ignorance is openness and curiosity, that you maybe you're self-secure enough to want to know other people's experience.
Like on an interpersonal private level, and I know this is for broadcast, so I'm sure you'll count what you say. How do you keep your patience? I mean, you're dealing with people. How do you not get annoyed with that behavior sometimes? You know, it must test you.
I've had many times where I felt rage, but I don't deal with rage overtly. Thankfully, I don't have that. Other people do. And sometimes I think, if you were asking this to someone else, like you would get a worse reaction than what I'm giving you right now.
What Brendan likes to call a bunch of fives in the schniz.
Yeah, exactly. I'm very patient with it. I'm happy to talk, but people get tired. And so if you see someone losing their mind because, let's say, they're a healthcare assistant in a hospital, they're having to do the dirty work, carrying older patients around, bathing them, wiping their bums, and so on and so forth. And then a relative comes in and calls them the N-word. Why will you not lose it and shout? You know what I mean? If you're getting that kind of treatment all the time. So I think that I'm patient with it. I'm patient with it because I understand that there is a lot of ignorance, like I mentioned earlier, with educational systems not including these kinds of discussions and modules and topics into the system from early on, and fear because of the media.
And Helen, one story that really stayed with me as well is when you were training as a doctor, when you were a junior doctor, people never assumed you were the doctor. Is that correct?
Yeah. So when I was doing my rotations in hospital as a student doctor, there's just always, oh, hi, nurse. No, I'm not a nurse. I'm a student doctor. Oh, wow, you're doing well for yourself.
Well, I mean, how do you not punch them?
I'm like, excuse me, do you know how much it costs for me to be here?
Adding to your exchequer while I'm doing it. Absolutely.
Exactly.
Well, Helen, I have to say you're such an asset for your work and for your voice. And for your accessible communication style, just telling it like it is, and having the good grace and self-containment to keep on going. It's so lovely to hear your story.
We all have to be tolerant towards one another, and we just need to be patient, and we need to learn. So the way that I would pause and ask about Irish history should be this, that same courtesy should be offered to myself. It's just a back and forth that we all need to have, because whether we like it or not, the world is becoming more integrated and Ireland is becoming more metropolitan, and intercultural, whether we like it or not, it's happening.
I mean, I'm just mainly hoping that the introduction of black skin into Ireland is going to eventually increase the melanin quotient in our own skin. So, someday we'll all be a little bit more caramel because you've come here, and that's kind of nice.
Exactly. And that's also good for like the genetic pool, genetic conditions. There's quite a few of them here. And just cultures and learning and growing, it just makes them everywhere a more colorful place, a more interesting place.
And so do you.
On that note.
I literally could listen to you all day and all night. I love your storytelling ability, and I love the way you impart information as well. It's very engaging. It's a real talent. It's not a skill, it's a talent. You have this incredible communication style. And it's really engaging. So thank you so much. And you were our first guest. Yay!
Thank you so much, guys. This is so much fun.
Thanks again to the brilliant Dr. Helen Zidon for sharing her story with us this week on Lennon Courtney Left Alone with Guests.
If you enjoyed this week's episode, we'd love you to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an issue.
For all the latest updates on Lennon Courtney at Dunnes Stores, be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube.
Thanks as always to Katie Laffin for creating and performing our wonderful theme music, and to Krutika Kotian for her work behind the scenes, and of course the fabulous Esther O'More Donoghue for producing a wowie wonderful, wonderful show.
People, until next Thursday.
Bye.